welcome Naval. Welcome to Signal Quest with BVHK.
Thanks, Harish, and happy
Yeah.
to be here.
So planning to pick your brains for the next 45, 60 minutes on a wide variety of topics. But just to set the context, you moved from banking and private equity to now leading Brookfield's renewable power business. So what was the most unexpected learning from this transition over the years for you?
Yeah, thanks for an easy question to start with. But I would say the biggest change in my mind was I thought in this new role, leadership role, it was all about getting more deals done, building the platform, just do five M&As in the year and all of that kind of stuff. More sort of, it was a very transactional mindset. But I very quickly realized that doing deals is just a very small part of what the mandate is. The mandate really was to build the business. And really, the difference between that is effectively is the term leadership. And a large part of the journey has been about how to be an effective leader, how to set the right systems and processes, how to hire the right people, people way smarter than you, how to empower others more than sort of focus on doing things on your own, how to uh, how to handle failure, uh, how to handle success, not getting too emotional on either side of the spectrum, and how to take big calls and back yourself in this whole context, right? So the what I thought was about doing bunch of transactions ended up being really a little bit more about finding yourself in your own leadership qualities and style and being patient and implementing that. And I think that's been both unexpected and very rewarding and a great learning experience, and I'm still
Right. Yeah,
learning.
that's almost like a philosophical answer, Naval, and I know that you've chosen your words very wisely. So I will want you to unpack that a bit. Was there a pivotal moment when this realization struck, or what was this whole journey like?
Yeah, so it's difficult to say there was one moment. There have been so many moments, yeah, and I would say it's that journey along the way, especially dealing with not getting things right or not doing or sticking to your guns, or your conviction. And there's a lot of learning that comes from. We're in a business. We're paid to build the business, do deals, grow our AUM or assets under management, so on and so forth. So when you are the guy who for 3, 4 years is saying, "Look, I will not do this deal. I will not do this kind of deal. This doesn't make sense." Um, it's the right thing to do, but it also comes with a lot of pressure from both for yourself internally as well as from the franchise, that why are we not growing, right? Ultimately growth is important. So it's the learning, but if you know you're right, and therefore the concept of backing yourself, you just have to just keep on chipping away, building having the building blocks in place bit by bit, and then things happen. And when they happen, it's almost like a J curve, right? And we've seen that J curve in our business. We were essentially purely in startup mode between 2018 and 23, but that's the time when I was really building team, system, process, all of the stuff that I spoke about. And but we didn't have much to show in terms of result. We were in our business. We measured by dollars deployed or megawatts installed. We were we had sort of meandered to 1,000 megawatt of operating assets. Between 2023 and now, we're 45,000. So that's but that growth was not possible if I had done things wrong in the foundation building time, or if I had succumbed to pressure. So there's a lot of learning in all of that, and I always I go back to maybe one comment that one of my seniors made to me is, when you get stuck with a lot of things and you feel you're right where things are not getting done. So my senior colleague told me, look, you've got to make a distinction between, do you want to get things done or do you want to be right? And there's a very subtle difference in that, and you, especially in deal making, that just changes the whole parameter. You let the other side win, battles that they need to win, but you got to win the war, right? And a lot of times when things are stuck, it's that mindset of thinking bigger, thinking about the bigger picture, and just moving forward. It's those kind of little snippets or tidbits that that you keep on adding and accumulating, and they compound into making the business that it is today. But I would say that's one that always sticks in my mind because I was getting stuck on a lot of deals, and I think I was in my own head, and just that difference in thinking about things, about dropping your ego and just focusing on getting the thing done versus being right, gets a lot of things done
Right.
actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're talking about this overnight success, which took 5 years in the making, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure it must not have been easy because it's not about you being the operator yourself. You would probably need to influence a lot of people, and like you said, the franchise is also having some expectations from you. So you need to both be right and get things done in many cases. So how was that journey like, where you couldn't do things yourself, but you had to get others to do the right thing?
Yeah. So look, I think that one of my strengths, I would say, and I don't have many, but one of them is I think I'm a good listener. So, and I think again, in that whole sort of ambit of leadership, being a good listener is extremely important. So I have never really faced too much of an issue in getting the best out of people around me, I think, simply because I listen. And I really believe in empowering people because and empowering actually means getting out of the way and letting people succeed or fail, knowing that the end result is not going to impact their careers. It's really the effort that matters. So, and I think when you apply that approach, yes, things will not get done. But what you end up doing is you end up building a very cohesive unit, both at say the investment team level, which I'm a part of, or our portfolio companies where you have the operating CEO, CFO, and CXOs and larger platforms. Some of them you also have met and seen. So I have always been very lucky to be surrounded by people far smarter than me, and so therefore I almost take it as a responsibility to make sure they're heard and that they're empowered, and that means that even if things don't happen in the short term, they will eventually happen. You just have to be patient.
Right. Yeah. I think, Naval, you're really underplaying your role in this whole thing by saying that you're lucky by, being surrounded by smart people, because in your role, I'm sure you play a very big role in choosing who are the people that you are surrounded by when it comes to who you invest in. So how does, this philosophy fit in with your investment philosophy when you are looking at deals, when you're looking at teams, people? How do you make this happen where you can go back and say that, yeah, this I'm in a happy space because I'm working with people who are smarter than me, like you say?
Yeah, so I think look, a lot of it is also to do with the firm that I'm a part of, where actually one of our biggest KR is how do you create your replacement. Now, so which means that you really drop your ego. You're not insecure about hiring smart people. You actually want to empower. So all of that flows from that singular
Mhm.
philosophy of really building organizations or building teams with the intent that you're essentially creating people, or you're giving people opportunities for them to outshine you as well. And then they're given the responsibility to do the same. So it's at every level that happens, right? And so the firm that I'm a part of is a big believer in that philosophy, and it just plays out at every level. It's in almost an expectation of every leader to be of that mindset. You cannot succeed in this business within our setup if you don't have that mindset. And really, so when I'm looking to hire people, I'm really it's a what I take for granted is people know the technical side of things because you're not hiring, people they've come through a certain vigor. So that part is taken care of. What you're really looking for is that skill set. In their language is more about I or is about we. What have they done wherein they've collaborated and created something meaningful? What's the real motivation for them to move and be part of this setup? Those things are I really focus on those kind of questions, what you really find is people who have an entrepreneurial hustle or mindset, who believe in working in systems and teams, but not getting stuck by the bureaucracy of system and teams. In fact, believe in sort of breaking through that barrier. Um, People who don't really think of themselves in a very siloed way, and look to sort of help and contribute wherever they're asked for. And you, because we are part of a culture, when we're hiring, we kind of debate and see whether that person fits that kind of that profile or that mindset. Uh, and when you just start putting them together at various levels, be it at operating platform levels or at in the investment team level, then the compounding effect of that, the shared network effect of that really kicks in. So, yeah, I will take a little bit of credit for having stuck to the philosophy of the franchise, and which is very, I would say, aligned to the way I would like to build a business. And yeah, and therefore we've been very lucky, I guess, in terms of having the people on board that we do, and we and they do some crazy stuff. It's just amazing what we're able to pull off every year. But I don't think it's by luck. I think it's because of these salient features that I mentioned that we've got inherent in every senior member that we've got. um, we end up doing what seems impossible or seems a little out of whack at that point in time, but we managed
Right.
to get it
It's
done.
interesting, Naval, when you talk about these attributes, some of these are, I feel, easier to identify in, say, freshers, youngsters. Do you think it gets difficult as, you are looking at hiring, say, CXO level folks, because they may have a very strong point of view on life and career because they've gone through life, and they feel they know how things work in an industry. So, do you think that makes it difficult?
Um, the short answer of that is yes. Um, but I would say we are one of the largest now investors in the space that I'm in, which is renewables. And that's not because I'm doing all the work, it's because we still can find people at the senior level who have that mindset. And I think the biggest difference is one should never undermine the body of work or experience someone brings to the table. In fact, that's a core strength. But if that work comes with a rigidity of mind, which means that you're not willing to learn, you're not willing to listen, you're not willing to sort of change your view when data changes, you're too attached to your own view, um, then you'll have a problem in our system. So, and that's fairly easy for us to figure out in a few conversations as well, right? So because so yes, it is difficult to find such people, but it's not impossible. And therefore, the other way around to it is yes, you hire a few people from the market, but what you're really doing also is grooming young talent even within your firm. And in Brookfield system, if we're actually very big on giving young people much senior roles than what say they would have got outside of our ecosystem, because at least they don't come with that rigidity of mindset, or which hopefully is relatively lower. Yes, they what they will lack in experience, they will make up with hustle and the right attitude, and then there is enough of seniority and enough people around them and enough system around them to make sure they don't make any big binary mistake. So I think it's a combination of yes, always be in the market, look for the right people, but not be in a rush. But where you find the right mindset, you just go in quickly and pick those guys up and figure out what they'll do later on. These set of people tend to be able to do anything and everything, but at the same time groom talent internally. And that speaks to the point that I was making earlier about always looking for your replacement. What you're essentially also doing is always looking for that set of qualities within your younger sort of team members. And if they exhibit those, then you bring them up the curve a bit faster and you accelerate their
Right. I
development.
hope I don't make this like making you show your hand. But is this philosophy true only when you look to hire people, or is this also the philosophy that you as a company use when you're evaluating opportunities?
I would say the same cultural mindset. So we have as Brookfield two options. We can set up platforms ourselves, which means we're hiring people ourselves, we're building the whole business ourselves, or we invest in companies who we feel are equal or even better capital allocators than us, right? So if they can do the job better than us, then now if they can do the job equally or better than us, that's because they have the same or better amount of vigor, entrepreneurial mindset, flat organization structures, less bureaucracy, all of those things that we have built internally. Now, those are not proprietary to Brookfield. Now, there are firms which are probably out there who have a similar mindset, and if we find those kind of firms, then those are the kind of firms we invest in. And if you look at our portfolio, I would say that that's a very common theme in the senior management of all the companies that we've invested in India, not just in renewable, in Brookfield in
Mm-hmm.
general.
Right. And is there something unique about renewable which allows for people with this kind of a mindset to grow, blossom, especially in our country today? Is there something like that structurally that you see?
No, I wouldn't say structurally. I just think growth follows growth. So in an industry which is reasonably large now, for 200 plus gigawatt of renewable power, some 40,000 megawatt coming online every year. That just gives a lot of space for growth. And therefore, even when you're hiring young talent, it gives them the right kind of experience. They're not just managing what's built, which is also an important part, but they're actually out there building assets. They're out there going through the entire life cycle journey of from land acquisition to finding power contracts to building it out to operating and managing them, right? And when you have such a large market and which is continuing to grow at a large pace, that just I think means that within the renewable sector you will attract the right talent. And the talent that you hire relatively early will have a huge runway of growth in
Right.
front of them, and that is helpful.
Mm-hmm. And in India, have you ever felt that renewables or infrastructure in general in the public perception is not considered to be sexy, right? It is not the same as people working on cutting edge in AI probably, or quick commerce these days. So does that also
Mm.
mean that you actually get to talk to more grounded people who are really interested in putting in the hard yards and are really looking at doing the right thing?
I think it would be unfair for me to characterize people uh, in non-renewable or non-infrastructure sectors as people who are not willing to put hard yards.
But
I think that would be a too
yeah.
extreme a statement. Uh, Look, I don't think that is really look. I think the challenge in India is just the growth or pace of growth is so high in our space that finding the right talent or volume of talent to match our cultural ecosystem as well as to the execution sort of like my businesses are building 10 to 15% of India's incremental capacity right now. I don't have 10 to 15% of India's talent. It's just not possible, right? So I think it's more pangs of growth or a happy problem to have because you're on a high growth sort of space than saying that we're getting more grounded people or not. I think people should be ambitious. People should have a view, an economic view of creating value for themselves, and whether they're in renewables or in any other sector. And in fact, we would prefer people who are greedy for money than people who are not greedy for money. This is not a socialist environment. Um, but what you want alongside that is all the other things, the collaborativeness, the entrepreneurialness, the willing to sort of not take no for an answer, hustle, find the right sort of the thing. And that attitude is going to be a very positive way of doing things, in my view, in any industry that
Right.
you're in.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you're talking about renewables, so what do you think are the hidden success factors that outsiders often underestimate in the renewable energy sector?
So I would say one is renewable, but maybe taking a step back more broadly, I think the sort of business building mindset versus just doing a deal mindset, I think that is a very key. It goes back to my answer to the first question. There is a very, very key um, foundational sort of mindset that you need to have if you want to build a large business. Now, yeah, like I mentioned, do you want to be right or do you want to get the job done? Uh, the answer to that question determines whether you have a deal making mindset or not, right? You would rather you, and the way we think about doing things is, what does the other side want? It's not just about what I want. You focus more on what the other side wants. How do we give them what they want? Whether it's a buyer or my asset or a seller or or when I'm selling or when I'm buying or selling, it doesn't matter. So what does the other side want? How do I give them what they want and in return get what I want? Versus saying, let me just get what I want and I don't really care about the market. It doesn't work that way, right? It doesn't work that way on a consistent basis. For a one-off deal, it might. So that's, I think, one. So that if you have that mindset, eventually you will end up doing building a great business, which means you'll do enough and more deals. But I think specifically for renewables, I would say just boots on the ground. I think is such a big differentiator. Having the operating capability, understanding the regulations and regulatory side of things, just the nuts and bolt of things. That's where, just having that in-house through the team that you have and your own experience, what that does is that you're not just chasing everything that's out there in the market, you're actually creating deals. Having that, because you're connecting dots that others don't see for the moment, you're taking a contrarian view, you're looking at risk very differently. Things which may seem very risky to someone who's only doing an Excel sheet modeling will look very different to someone who has strong operating capabilities coming through the boots on the ground or the senior operating teams that you have, because you'll find where, okay, yeah, that's a risk, but I know how to mitigate it. I know how to. So let's buy it at X price, but we will be able to mitigate it, and we'll get that value, and you'll justify that X price, right? So it's that operating capability is very, very foundational to us, and I think is a very, very big reason for our success. Even more so, when we're looking to acquire other businesses, our operating capabilities are actually respected by the other side because they know that if things go wrong, shit hits the fan, we as an investor are not going to panic because we've been there and done that so many times. We have on ground experience ourselves. We'll actually be more solution oriented versus, creating havoc at the
Right. So,
boardroom.
without giving too much away, can you give, concrete examples of, how you get into solution mindedness? Maybe talk about something which has happened in the past.
Oh, there's so much, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can. There's so many sort of examples which are. Um, I mean, even at the operating level, right? We've had a situation wherein we've signed a power contract with the government, with a specific government. We are 70% project built, and suddenly we get a letter saying, by the way, we're canceling
Mm.
the PPA. Now, in normal course, we would have won that argument anyway, but it would have taken us 2 years. Our project would have gone down the drain, right? So, therefore, saying, look, what do we need to do to get this thing overturned in the right way without it taking 2 years of litigation? Because we'll win the litigation, but we would have
Right.
lost the project, right? And therefore, then figuring out, okay, who wrote the letter? Why did he write? What were the circumstances? We got clubbed with other projects who were not, delivering on time. We were on time. Stressing the with the state government or and its leadership as to why what they're doing is completely wrong and illegal, and it's better that this is revoked versus this thing. But even when revoking, doing it in a respectful manner for them, because once a state a government instrument writes something, they can't just take it back. So what are the reasons that we can give as to why our project needs to be A, differentiated, B, the letter pulled back in a more sort of, call it amicable, or in the right sort of way, which doesn't, no one loses
Mm.
face kind of thing. Uh, I know I'm speaking generics because specifics I think would be unfair to speak of, but we got it done in a month
Mm.
and a
Mm.
half. And the entire industry was saying, "How did you manage to do this?" We're like, "We just did what we thought was the right thing to do. We don't know. There's no
Mm,
precedence to this, right? We didn't pull out a rule book. We didn't do any of that. But it's stuff like that, and that's at the at the operating level. Yeah, even when we were looking to buy platforms, something or the other happens, which there's a disagreement on ESOPs, there's a disagreement on management incentive plans, there's this, and then you say, okay, fine, what do you want? Okay, I'll give you what you want, but this is what you'll have to
mm,
give me in return. Are you
mm,
okay
mm.
with that? If not, then you shouldn't be okay with me with asking for what you're asking for, right? Let's make
Correct.
it symmetric. And then you find that, things sort of find an equilibrium which is acceptable to both sides. So there'll be a lot of examples, but I think yeah, one or two of these kind that I mentioned, we live this on a daily basis.
So it's about the never split the difference. The book about negotiation that's happening all the time across
Yeah.
all the players.
So look, I don't know whether it's not a life or death situation, as what you can't split the difference when
Correct.
someone's life is
Mm,
at stake, right? But if you have enough margin of safety, if you back yourself that you will be able to find value, it's not just what the other side is offering, is what can you
mm,
do on that asset? Can you get better financing? Can you do brownfield expansion? Can you do all of that? And if you back, yeah, I'll do it. And therefore, always looking at business in a spectrum of returns versus
mm,
one
mm.
number, right? And saying, look, yeah, if I do all of this, even if I give a little today, it's fine because my upside return is this, but my downside is also
Right, right.
acceptable, right? So, uh, I don't know. I always believe it's better to give a little, but then back yourself that, you'll be able to, with your own strengths and capabilities, be able to recover that. And look, any deal that you do, you're the highest bidder. That's the reality, or the lowest power tariff bidder if it's a government bidding. But if you're acquiring an asset, you are the high, you've overpaid versus the rest of the market. That's why you got the deal, right? But you overpaid because you believe that it's fair price, not basis just the asset or the business itself, but what you can do with that business. And in your hands, that business should be able to generate much better outcomes. And when that is achieved, the price that you've paid will not look crazy. It'll be sensible. And but having that mindset versus just being an Excel sheet junkie, I think is extremely
Right.
important.
You used a great term there, Excel sheet junkie. Somebody once told me the best way to best tool to write fiction is not Word, it is actually Excel, because you can just do a drag drop of the
Yeah, it's the
formula,
language.
and you can show profits and margins and whatever you want, right? Uh, so in
Yeah.
your industry, and especially in your role, how do you see this, panning out? Because at the end of the day, you need people to work with, and we spent the last like 20 minutes talking about how to work with people. We didn't even get into, Excel sheets and numbers and valuation. But
Hmm.
how does that pan out for you when you invest in a company? You need people to deliver at the end of the day. So how does that operating system of, people's minds, how does that, work for you?
So look, when we are buying a business, we're not buying. There is a certain business plan or investment thesis basis which we're buying that business, right? Like we will grow capacity from X to Y. This is how we'll do it. We'll have this financial engineering that we'll be able to do. Here's the operating sort of value that we'll be able to bring, lowering costs. We'll be able to get better PPAs. All our business is fairly simple. There are four or five key levers, and we sort of have a view on all four or five when looking at acquiring a business, right? But and we'll run our maths, and as much as Excel sheet is creative, but it is extremely important because it tells you the range of outcomes
Correct.
that are possible, and then which ones are in the realm of believability, and therefore your investment case, which ones are sort of really out there and stuff, and that's your upside. You get it, great. You don't get it, you're okay. But really, also it tells you what's your downside as well. So, but once all of that is done and a business plan has been agreed, it's been approved by your investment committees, and you've made the deal happen, that's actually where the real work starts. Make doing a deal is easy. My ex-boss used to say, doing a deal is like a bank robbery. You need to know how to get out before you get in. So, and in our case, I mean, the analogy is, yeah, you can do a deal, but you need to know how to create value and then know how to exit. And you can put anything on a piece of paper. Ultimately, it's then you have to put on your asset management hat, and we have a dedicated asset management function, which essentially looks at every line item of what we have said in our business plan, puts in 100-day plans, puts in longer term 5-year plans of implementing those. Like if we have said we will do uh, 3,000 or 4,000 megawatt of growth in the 5 years, then it's broken down to every year how much will do, how will we do it, what do we need to get that done, and maybe and first question and maybe and generally the answer to that is, oh, we need to hire a CEO first. So it starts with people. Like let's put the right people in. Let's spend the first 1 year putting the right people in. If they're not there, if they're there, then we're okay. But if they're not there, then it's people. Then cultural integration, and then comes the okay. If you want to put a solar asset, wind asset, 4,000 megawatt, you need to have 4,000 megawatt worth of land and interconnect. That's not going to come in 4 years later. That needs to happen today. That's the pre-investment. Then the PPA, and then what's the business strategy? Everything is laid out, but then it's you put on your asset management hat and you have dedicated people who are really essentially the strategic advisors of the CXOs and the platforms and really driving those initiatives and being aligned with those with those teams and at pushing those teams and continuous and doing that and reevaluating and continuously sort of doing that process on a day in day out basis. It's a treadmill in that sense. Uh, but that's really the approach that we follow. And that's why we're more hands-on, and that's where the operating capabilities, that's where it comes. You can't really tell a CEO what to do if you've never done it yourself, right? You lose credibility, and so. But if you have, and then you're not really stepping into the shoes of the CEO or the CFO or the COO or the CCO, but you're saying, look, guys, have you thought of it this way? Well, here is what we can bring as Brookfield, from our global franchise, and but you've got to sort of implement. Or here is money, and just go buy land and trust us. This will have value 3 years from today. So we can take a slightly longer term view. We're not caught up in the quarterly, day to day kind of things as well. But really bringing all of that to bear and then holding the whole asset management function accountable. I genuinely believe if we have a mindset that all successes are and failure is at the platform company level, then we're doing something seriously wrong. Yes, the execution is happening there, but if we have to take accountability for that execution, if it's not happening the way we want it now, accountability doesn't mean people will get fired. I think a lot of times when you use the term accountability, it seems, oh, we'll fire people. Accountability means, look, if it's not happened, then we start putting a hat on what can we do to improve it. You get more control because you're asking yourself the question, look, what could I have done better as an asset manager to have improved the outcome? Do I need to relook at the team? Do I have to relook at the way we're buying land, the way we're do I have to relook at the business model? And then continuously assessing and implementing, whatever your findings are. So, um, and if you do this long enough, you do it consistently enough, you do it with the right discipline, and you're extremely emotionless and egoless about it. Uh, you know, things happen more often than not in the way that ideally they
Right,
should
and
happen.
I couldn't help catching the word align that you used, Naval, when you were speaking. I always, when people ask me about alignment, how do you measure alignment? So I always tell them it's difficult to say when it is aligned, but it is very easy to say when things are not aligned. It's like, having a wicket keeper. When you are noticing a wicket
Mm.
keeper, dropping catches, that's when you realize that, yeah,
Mm.
his keeping is not that great, right? So because you
Yeah,
have to do that 50 overs in a one day, or probably 300 overs in a test match, every ball this guy has to bend down, catch the ball, and keep the troops engaged, and all of that. That's the job of the wicket keeper today. So
yeah.
it has to be invisible. So how do you make sure your teams are aligned, and you also made the very valid point that you have to keep doing that day in day out. It's not a one time fix. It's not that you can do an option and say,
It's a
yes,
continuous
we are
process. Yeah,
aligned. It doesn't work like that. So how do you make sure that happens?
yeah. So look, alignment is on, especially with portfolio companies. I would say it's on two or three levels. Number one is financial alignment with shareholders, right? So we make sure that if we make money, the management teams make a lot of money, relative to the net worth. So there's complete alignment there. Misalignment would be we've not made any money and management has gotten rich, or the other way around that we've made a lot of money and we've not incentivized the management team. What's their incentive? Why are they doing this, right? So first of all, you've got to have a financial alignment. I think then beyond that, so that's sort of call it alignment between shareholder and management, which is contractual, which is right. People should believe that if they're working here, if they do their job well and they create shareholder value, only if they create shareholder value, they'll make so much of money that they don't need to work anywhere else, right? And that's where being an economic animal is extremely important. But it's not just being an economic animal; it's about do business the right way. Don't take shortcuts, because if you do take shortcuts, you'll destroy shareholder value, you'll destroy value for yourself. So that's, I think, a simple this thing. But I think the second level and the more difficult one, which is what you have to continuously assess, is how do you ensure that there's no lack of ownership? And for me, I pick up the warning signals if some of the senior guys are always blaming someone else. It's that the moment that happens, you have to step in and shut it down. Like, guys, no, that's not on. Let's just take on the responsibility and let's see what we can. Let's do what's then in our control, and that's the continuous engagement that's happening, right? There's no point blaming the government. There's no point blaming. What could we have done differently? And if we couldn't have done anything differently, fine. What could we have done better then? There are different ways you can ask the same question, but you've got to nip out this let's blame the junior most guy or let's just blame someone else. That's just a very unproductive way of working, in my view. And I guess the second element of all of this is just killing bureaucracy. If you have to go through three levels to talk to your boss, otherwise he's not accessible, there is something seriously wrong in the organization. Good ideas will never go
Correct.
up, and bad ideas will just
Hmm.
keep on filtering down, right? And that's just so. In fact, one of the things that we all, as Brookfield, we're a $1 trillion asset manager. But I have direct access to my boss, who's running literally a global business. And that's not because I've done anything special, but it is specifically designed that way so that decision making is quick. Follow system process, but be quick in decision making. Don't have multiple layers. That's how speed comes. That's how nimbleness comes. That's how even if you're doing something wrong, you'll realize it much quicker. And what's happening at Brookfield level should happen at the platform level also. And platform level is some, because you're not there in the day to day all the time. Just checking in with the platform, making sure decision making is quick, and people are encouraged to speak up. It's not a hero worship
Hmm.
culture. Those things are extremely important, and you've got to, even if it means taking external help. And we've spoken about this also earlier. Then be very very open to that idea to make sure that it gets driven into the DNA and culture of the organization over time. That you just cannot tolerate
Right.
bureaucracy.
And is this something of a Brookfield DNA, or have you seen this across investment companies?
No, I would say that it's the DNA of all successful businesses. And we are one of many businesses which are successful. I'm sure the other ones that also do will have a similar mindset. I don't know of a very bureaucratic, fast-growing business. I mean, I would struggle to find one, right? So I would say that these are traits that you should look for even when you're looking to join a business or a company or a firm. That how bureaucratic they are. If you want to be in a growth mindset kind of place, if you just want to have a slightly more less growth or more sort of process oriented, there are other places for that. But I would say this would be a common trait, I would guess, or a minimum success factor across successful high
Right,
growth firms.
right. And the one challenge that I see in my work with companies, especially young companies which are growing and want to scale, right? Initially, the DNA is very entrepreneurial. It's all about hustle. But at a point, either there is an investor who comes in, or the founder thinks that, oh no, we need to, professionalize, and we can't be a hero-driven culture anymore. We need to systematize, which is all great. And that's where sort of, in the name of systematization, some bureaucracy creeps in, and before you know, you've added so many layers. So how do you in practice make sure that nimbleness and systematization doesn't encourage bureaucracy in any way?
Yeah. So look, at least, and I think to each his own, I guess, in this. But the way at least I have seen it work for me is I try and lead by example. So I will go into meetings with portfolio companies and be quick in decision making, and then I say, this is what I expect of you as a CEO or CFO. That just be that quick, be know that you're empowered, and it's about constant communication of that empowerment, and then also at times showing it with your own in your own actions, right? And whether it's bureaucracy or whether it's say junior teams speak up, I actually encourage my own team to refute what I'm saying, and I sometimes do it in front of the larger team or portfolio team, so that they know the people can say no to me as well, and it's okay. Culture actually, if you really think, where does it doesn't come
Correct.
from a book. It comes from enacting that culture. And then if enough people do it, enough people at the right level do it, it percolates down. And it percolates into the system. So this is what should keep, I think, most business leaders up at night. That is the culture percolating down to the grassroots level. And you can't outsource this. You've got to create other leaders within your firm who also imbibe the same culture and who also exhibit same behavior, and you've got to expose that entire way of thinking or being to the wider set so that it just percolates down, and you've got to continue to do it. I can't if I am going to meet my operating businesses once a year, uh, that's just a
Right.
conference. How do I ensure that each CEO of my business has my time, uh, whenever they want to call me, I am reachable, accessible, whether it's me, whether it's my head of asset management, how do I ensure that there's a face-to-face meeting once every 2 weeks? How do I ensure that I meet the broader business teams? How do I ensure we go down to the asset level? That's what a lot of time. So none of this is about deal making, by the way, right? But it's that culture, because what will happen is if this percolates down, the next deal will not come from me. It shouldn't come from me. It'll come from somewhere within that system. Someone just thought of an idea and has had the courage to speak up and explain it to his boss and then we said, like, let's just do it. That sounds amazing.
Right.
So I don't know whether that's a textbook answer or a practical answer, but it is the hardest part of the job. It's the most responsible part of the job, and you can't outsource it to anyone. You have to do it yourself, and you have to encourage your senior leadership to do it as well on a
Correct,
daily
correct.
basis.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's something which we often end up needing to tell some of our prospects. Most of the clients that we work with already imbibe this mindset, so it's easier with them. But with prospects, it's always like there's somebody looking for a band-aid. Oh, can you come and fix our culture?
Mm.
If it was that easy, you wouldn't have been in that situation, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, there is no. So where I think external agencies play a part is that sometimes, it's like when you're at home and your parents are telling you, you need to do this, you need to do this. The kids will be, and I don't mean to undermine, portfolio company, but the kids are like, "Yeah, ये तो रोज ही बोलते रहते हैं." But when your aunt comes and says it, or someone else comes and says it, you're like, yeah, they
Correct.
listen, right? So sometimes you do need an external party to reinforce
Yeah.
your intent, uh, in a way that sounds like an independent view versus a biased view coming in. I'm saying biased not in the terms of
Hmm,
negative or
hmm.
positive, but you don't want to be the broken
Correct.
record also as a leader of the business. You want others to say, and then you kind of say, okay, look, I'm also learning. I'm not perfect. So what tools can I also learn to send this message out as much as possible? So external parties, agencies do have a role to play, but that role has to be very, very nuanced, and it has to sort of play in with, you know, uh, how they give that message becomes very important versus, what
Correct,
the
correct.
message is. Because the message is
Yeah,
already being given, but it needs to be given
right.
differently, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. So, what have you learned about cross-regional teams? Leading them through volatility, rapid growth, even in India. I mean, when I say regional, not even talking about international, cross-regionalism, right?
Yeah. No, I would say that, look, my experience of the last 20 odd years of working is it takes an entire village to do a deal. I mean, I'm probably stealing some of or changing a phrase which is quite famous, but I genuinely mean that there are your legal team, there are your tax teams, there are and a large part about doing deals is actually appreciating what each one is doing, but empowering them to do what they're best at, but making sure that they're all talking to each other, and it's not a he says she says. It's okay, fine. Here is a tax issue. Legal guys, can you help us solve this? It's a lot of that, just keeping everything together, and getting that whole bandwagon to sort of move together and cohesively. Uh, and the best way to do it is, again, it just goes back to the basics, empowering people, saying that you don't need me in the room to take a view. As long as even if you've taken the wrong view, we can always go back, but know that we trust you. You've been hired for a specific job. You're the expert. Go ahead and go for it, but or feel free to bounce off any ideas or doubts that you have, but you're the boss, kind of a mindset, and really listening, and not just sort of pounding the table and saying, no, I want this, and the other way, take my way or the highway, versus saying, look, guys, I've heard you. Here is why I think it's where I'm coming from. Either you agree with me or disagree with me, but
Right,
I've heard you. Right. So it's that approach, and whether it's cross-regional within the team, people want to be heard, and they want to be heard because that's what gives them relevance, and rightly so. Otherwise, if you're going to be the guy who's just bulldozing things through all the time, then you're not really creating leaders or empowered sort of colleagues. You're just creating people who will just escalate the problem up. So I think it's a lot about listening, understanding people's perspective, where they're coming from, and then saying, "Look, I've heard you. This is what you said. This is the part of which I don't agree with. Let's just try and do it this way. And unless you really disagree with, let's
right.
just go with it. If I have to take a call that which is contrarian, but oftentimes you hear people and you say, you know what, you're right. I was wrong. Let's change it.
Right.
So it's both ways. But if you don't hear, how will you change your view or stick to your view?
So when you're dealing in the private equity space, right, where you are investing in companies which have sort of established themselves, because you're not talking about investing in startups. So
Hmm.
they're probably family businesses. They have run things for generations. So going back to what we were speaking of earlier, right? They have done things in a certain way, and today you come in as a private equity investor, and you are ready to put in this amount of funds. What happens next which improves the chances of success for everyone without, say, the founder feeling that, oh, somebody is coming in and sort of interfering in how I am doing things, while you getting things done in a fresher way? What needs to happen?
So I think there is a learning curve that both sides go through. When it's no different from a marriage, especially an arranged marriage. You may have done whatever due diligence you've done, but there's always a learning curve that starts post the marriage. And like in any successful marriage, the couple figures it out. And I think the same thing applies to a deal also. So typically, I mean, I can just from my own experience, uh, what you first ensure is that you don't try and be a bull in a china shop. We're not investing in uh, I don't know, FMCG, Zeptos of the world, those kind of businesses. We're investing in contracted cash flows, yes, high growth, but we have the luxury of 3 to 4 months of diligence, really getting to know the team, the business, and in most cases, because there's a relationship angle, you've known the sponsors for many years,
Correct.
even before that, right? So you're not going in blind. So I think first and foremost, don't try and change things just for the sake of changing things. You've done your deal, breathe. Um, Realize what's happening well and recognize that and don't change that for sure. So, in the case of the company that we invested in, uh, entrepreneurial management style, empowered teams, young teams, hustle. Why would you change that? That's exactly what we want, right? So that we don't change that. However, because there was a capital constraint before we came in, the mindset towards growth
Mm.
was limited, or the how much you can grow was, so if they thought they can do 400, 500 megawatts a year, we were like, no, I think you can do 1500, and that faced resistance. It's like, are you trying to set up KRAs for us, which we won't meet, and then dock us on our incentive? It goes into some tangent you've
Correct.
not actually thought of, right? And then it's again, so you're like, no, we genuinely believe you can do this. Here is how you can do it. This is what you need to do. Trust us on this part. Let's just go on the journey and see where it goes. We're back to 500 is not a bad this thing, but we think you're underplaying. So it's just that constant dialogue and reassuring that we're not here to um, we're not here to cut people's salary because instead of growing at 100%, they've grown at 50%, right? That's really not the point. But that trust is earned. It's not just handed over to you, and that's earned, and that's why it takes time. It takes 6 months, a year, because the other side also sees that we are a helpful partner. We're helping improve their credit rating, giving access to so much capital, bringing our relationships onto board, saying, why don't you do business with this company? Right? And they see that the intent really is the end outcome is to create shareholder value and to work with the management, which you've already aligned with. That's why you did the deal. Uh, and once that trust trust takes time in any business, but once that trust comes, and it normally comes with the kind of people we work with, otherwise we wouldn't be working with them, then it's easy. Then, and the same business which we said they could do 1500 megawatts a year is actually doing 1500 megawatts. In fact, they're now pushing, saying we can do
Right.
2000, right? So we knew what we wanted to change, but we were very clear that what's good, let's not change. What can be better needs to change. Uh, and that'll, even if we take 12 months to do it, it's okay. We're a long-term investor. We're not here to just buy
Hmm,
today,
hmm,
sell
hmm.
tomorrow.
And is it easy for founders to, get this change of mindset and this whole process? Because it's a journey.
It's a journey. So it doesn't have, and if you think about it, any founder has been very successful because he's had a certain way of doing things. He's been doing it for 10, 15 years, and he's had this whole team, you know, following him, and he's been successful. You invest in because he has that mindset, and so why should he just change it because
Right.
you asked him to change? You've got to convince him. But typically, good founders, again, when data changes and they feel that this is the right thing, they don't have an ego about
Hmm.
changing their mindset. It's not a
Correct.
defeat or win. That's a very black
Hmm.
and white way of looking. It's saying this is the way we were doing business. Here is a potentially better way. Why not do it that way? I create value for myself as well,
Hmm.
right,
Hmm.
as a
Hmm.
founder. But it takes time. It takes, but it's important to have those frank discussions on an ongoing basis, not to shy away from having these conversations. Sometimes they're difficult, but difficult doesn't mean that it's
Right.
it's wrong. It just takes
Right.
more time.
Right. And anything that you used to believe strongly about, building platforms that you've since changed your mind on?
Oh, I would say, again, maybe just going back to my first answer, I think you need to think big. You need to execute step by step, but you've got to think big. And where I'm coming from is when I joined Brookfield, I thought I'll just keep on buying small 50 50 megawatts and 10 साल में, that'll be like 1,000 megawatt, not a
Hmm.
bad outcome. Whereas the system has the ability. In fact, my boss once asked me, and we went to IC, we got approval to build a 500 megawatt single location site. Great achievement in terms of getting that, because it was on the back. Our business was 300 megawatts, so I was more than doubling. And his question to me was, how do you do this in 10 locations at the same time? So what he was saying is, how do you get a business which is building 5,000
Hmm.
megawatt a year? And I said, I thought he was joking, but he asked
Hmm.
very seriously. And I then went back and said, look, I'm thinking so small. Yes, it's important to do this because you build a team, they learn all of that. But the next one can't be another 500, or next one can't be another 50 in my earlier. You've got to use this as a stepping stone. So everything that you do is a stepping stone for something bigger. But that will only come if you think big. If you open your mind to the possibility, look, I want to build 5,000 megawatt a year. How do I do it? And the answer to that is, you probably need more than one platform. Okay, then how do I build more than one platform? And then, that's how we acquired CleanMac, Clean Green, Evren, the one that you're familiar with. We built that ground up. We've done Nevada. So, and now when you look at these four businesses together, they're going to build 4,500 megawatt next year,
Right.
right? And this is just 3 years back was when I had that conversation. But I think the biggest thing that I was doing wrong was I wasn't thinking big enough. You got to start thinking big and then work back. Oh, so what do I need to get it done? You can't just think big and leave it there. That's called
Hmm.
daydreaming. But you got to think big and then say, okay, what do I need to get there? So then you go step by step by step, and then it
Right. Right.
compounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need a bit of luck as well. But luck favors those who, I guess, take a few chances, and thinking big allows you the space to
Hmm,
take a
hmm,
few
hmm,
chances.
hmm. Right. So, if you were to advise a CEO about scaling renewable, infrastructure, something that is unconventional today that will help them maybe say 2030, something that is unconventional today. What would you advise them?
Uh, I That's a tough one because um, in my mind, good CEOs spot business opportunities when others are not really focused on them. Now, what that is today is, we have a few ideas, and we keep on sort of working on them, but uh, we're not in a very IP driven space, right? What's a good idea today? You execute. You just got to be the first out of the block on it, capture a certain market share business, and then 3 4 years down the road, that's what
Right.
everyone else is doing. But then you've got to go on to the next idea. So I wouldn't go into a specific idea, but I would say that mindset is extremely important. If a CEO is only there just to manage what is there, yeah, that they'll do a decent job. But that's not really going to create an organization for the future. Whatever we're doing today will not be very relevant 3 to 4 years from today. So one of my jobs and our CEO job is to say, what's the next
Hmm.
business model? So I would advise you, at least in our space, to be successful is, don't just think conventional is just paying the bills. But what's really going to create shareholder value and therefore value for the team is, let's do something which others are not doing. And that normally comes from understanding, connecting dots which others are not connecting. Looking at your interconnect rights and look and saying, look, where can we do this? Can we capture some more somewhere else? Can we use Brookfield's global relationship, get global businesses to come here? I mean, I'm just throwing sort of random statements I recognize, but it's really about uh, thinking unconventionally, uh, and spending at least 20 30% of your time thinking unconventionally, and not just be busy solving day to
Right.
day
Right.
problems. If a CEO is solving day to day problems only, he's not a CEO, he's a
Right.
COO.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And any trick that helps you do this more regularly, more often? Do you, cocoon yourself in a room, spend time walking, treadmill, reading, listening to podcasts, driving in traffic?
Uh, no, I mean, I think keeping yourself physically and mentally fit allows you the brain power to think. So yeah, I do keep myself or try and keep myself physically fit and mentally as uncluttered as I can, whether it's listening to music or in my case, frankly, spending time with my 7 year old and 5.5 year old. If you want to unclutter your mind, just talk to children. The best negotiators on the planet and most uncluttered, very clear thinkers. मुझे ये चाहिए तो चाहिए अभी कर लो जो करना है. So, but enjoying playing cricket with them and passing on my not so great cricketing skills, but it's just takes mind off things, and I think it's very important to do that. Um, and then I think more purely from a work perspective, saying that you will not be involved in a few things so that you create time for yourself. Is it so? Saying no to answering every call is extremely important. Um, Empowering your team and saying, look, you guys, I will not do it. Now, I'm not shirking work, but if I'm doing this, then that's my time that I can't spend to, thinking. And my job is to actually allocate some time to that thing. I can't be sitting and doing a PhD on thinking for 90% of my time, but I need that 10-20% in a day, which is an hour, which is half an hour. And if it means that I have to say no to getting caught up in the day to day in certain things, then I will say no. You guys, the team is big enough, good enough
Right.
to handle it. I've done it, but I need to spare that time. So I think, and I encourage that not just at my level, but at my colleagues as well. That take the time to think. We're actually paid to think. We're paid to do, execute what we've thought. But what are you executing if you've not thought? So uh, you won't be able to do anything unconventional if you're not taking
Right.
the time
We've
to think.
applied for a trademark for copyright for the think, say, do gap. So I'm going to use this line there, Naval.
Hopefully, I
Yes.
get some royalties.
So on that note, Naval, we'll close this conversation. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask you for some hot take kind of answers, right? So
I'll be terrible in that, but why don't you
yes.
give it a shot?
So one personal ritual outside work that makes you a sharper investor or leader.
Um, just taking time off, just switching off. I think switching off allows you to unclutter the brain. And when you unclutter the brain, that allows for the right kind of clutter to come in.
Right kind of clutter. I like that. So what's something you've unlearned, recently about managing risk or building teams?
Okay, even at the operating level, sometimes I feel we give a bit too much importance to too much of experience. I think we're guilty sometimes of saying at Brookfield level we'll keep this young and
Hmm.
hustle and let's give people let who've not done things this before, but because they've got the attitude, let's give them that chance. I think and we try and keep a lot of that technical and sectoral knowledge at the platform level. But I think sometimes it's actually it's a breath of fresh air to have businesses, have unconventional people who look at the thing with a problem statement of building renewable businesses very differently, and giving them that runway to sort of go down that path. So yeah, so I would say what I've unlearned is um, uh, putting too much importance to sectoral knowledge in the platform level. A little bit of fresh air there is a breath of fresh air there is also
Right.
very helpful.
One book that's shaped how you think about sustainability or capital allocation.
Yeah, I don't read much to be honest, but in terms of an author who I think is quite interesting to read is
Okay.
Morgan Housel. I would, as cliche as it may sound, but reading some of the stuff that he writes about on psychology of money, or just how to think about investments, I think those are mental
Hmm.
frameworks which are extremely helpful. And I would say another author that I find quite interesting is Charles Duhigg. And he has, I mean, everyone talks about Power of Habit, but the book I really like is Smarter, Faster, Better. And I think the some of the case studies that are there, he just brings them alive in terms of concepts and how you should be thinking about life in general, but then you can apply those frameworks to a lot of what you do. So I would say these two have shaped my thinking and therefore my capital allocation philosophy.
Okay. Which overused phrase in the energy transition world would you banish forever?
Oh, greenwashing.
Greenwashing.
I couldn't, yeah, greenwashing. I don't know what that is. We don't do that. We are genuinely setting up every little asset we set up is an electron which is generated using Mother Nature's gifts. But somehow I hear this word greenwashing a lot. Maybe not in our context, but I think we've got to move away from that and really think about what the fundamentals of what we're
Okay.
doing.
Final question, Naval. You get a billboard in every major financial district for a day. What 5 to 7 words will go on it?
Don't come to office if you're not having fun.
That's fantastic.
It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
worth
I
it.
think that sums up this conversation. So I had a lot of fun asking you all these questions, Naval, and I'm going to use this. If you don't think you're going to have a lot of fun answering my questions, don't come on this podcast. Is going to be my one line to sum this up. So
No, but I had fun, so thank you for doing this with me, and yeah, I hope people
yeah,
find it
thanks,
interesting.
thanks a lot, Naval. Fantastic. This is great. Yep.
Thanks so much.